We're coming back today. Andrew Miller, editor over at Hook'emHeadlines.com. With me, Shane Black, contributor over at Hook'emHeadlines.com. We are joining you a little less than 24 hours before, probably the biggest remaining non-conference game. We'll see what happens with the Tennessee game, but we have Creighton tomorrow. It will be a top 7 showdown. Number 7 Creighton versus number 2 Texas. 5-0 Texas headed into this one as well. Shane, what are some of your thoughts headed into it?
Yeah, I'm really excited for this one. Another chance for the Moody Center to really light a fire under this team. We saw the last two after that Gonzaga win. We knew it was coming on the Texas schedule. You're going into a little bit of a lull where you had the Northern Arizona game out in El Paso, and then you took on Texas Rio Grande Valley inside Gregory Gymnasium. So we haven't played in a game. The men haven't played a game in the Moody Center since that Gonzaga win. So it'll be nice to get back in there, and no better way to do it than welcoming a team like Creighton. I'm sure we'll get into the crux of the Blue Jays roster, but just a really sound team. Greg McDermott's been one of the better head coaches, one of the better offensive minds in the sport for what seems like more than a decade at this point. So I'm really excited for this matchup. I think it's going to tell us a lot about this Texas team, whether that one game against Gonzaga was just kind of a fluke and everything was clicking at once, or does this team really deserve that number 2 ranking next to its name? I like the opportunity to pick up big wins like this in the non-conference is awesome because you're essentially playing with house money. A loss to Creighton isn't really going to hurt your tournament resume. It can only build your case to, be a top seed come March. So I'm really excited. I'm excited for the atmosphere, and I expect it to be, a really high-level college basketball game.
Get myself off mute there. I swear to God, every video I sound like I'm 90. And this is a good way to mention it. I do feel like very millennial here that every time I hear Greg McDermott, I think Dougie McBuckets and, what was that 2013-14 Creighton team? Was that the year 14-15?
Yeah. So I think their best year was 2013-14. And it was their first year in the Big East too. So yeah, that was the last year of McBuckets. But yeah, it's been crazy. What I saw is Creighton's ranked 7th, which is tied for their highest in program history. I thought they might have gotten a little higher when Doug was in Omaha, but it turns out not. So I'm sure that's been mentioned inside those walls, and they know if they can pick up a win against Texas here, the second-ranked Longhorns, Creighton is going to be a top 5 team come next Monday, and that's a program-defining thing. For the 100 years Creighton basketball has, been alive, not alive, but as a program, they've never achieved ranking higher than 7. So they know what's on the table, and all they have to do is win on Thursday. So that might be a little extra motivation for them. Something to think about.
It's a really interesting matchup for Texas Creighton because, you don't see it a whole ton in the Texas media where you get these super in-depth basketball previews, but Texas really does match up about as well as anyone could with Creighton because what really stretched Creighton out was Arizona's bigs being able to run the floor and just get simple ball movement, take advantage of where you had the matchups on a man-on-man defense. For anyone that's a football fan, that might sound very simple, but in basketball, it's not as easy when you're playing a team that's as good as Creighton is and has as much length and just discipline down low. And yeah, it's this entire matchup is, we're talking about a December 1st matchup. Does this have any bearing come March? Maybe, maybe not. But it is something for Texas where it's you'll probably figure out a little bit about Texas that you'll see resurface come March. And I'm really, really interested to see how Texas deals with this type of team that's like really rock solid, top to bottom in the starting five, and that has a 7-footer. I think that's one elephant in the room, but rock solid starting five is another thing. If you want to make a Final Four, you're gonna have to go through one of these type of teams.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you look at their starting five, you mentioned it, they're all averaging 12 points or more per game this season, which is crazy. I feel like we've gone through, some of the leaner years in Austin where you don't even have a guy who averages 12 points. And, through 7 games, every starter in the Blue Jays lineup is averaging 5 points. And we kind of briefly talked about Creighton on the our preview show a couple weeks back. And, we both thought this team was pretty intriguing. And then seeing them in Maui, it was like, wow, like this team on the offensive end is scary. They kind of work 5 players as one brain. They move on and off the ball better than I've seen a collegiate team in a while. And truly, I think when you look at it, Arizona, again, is going to be a team that wins maybe 30 games. So a 2-point loss to Arizona is certainly not a blemish and is more of like a stamp of approval on your resume. So, yeah, Creighton's going to be tough. You mentioned the 7-footer Ryan Kalkbrenner, who was the Big East Defensive Player of the Year last season. Really good rim protector. He almost had like a little bit of a flu game against Arizona. Didn't seem like his best, and he still played well. On the offensive end, he has every post move in his bag. I mean, he's averaging 16 points per game this season on nearly 76% shooting. So around the rim, he's super effective. If he catches the ball with a foot in the paint, he's going to score most times. So it'll be interesting. We saw Texas and Chris Beard implement a strategy against Drew Timme where we weren't going to send the double until a foot got in the paint. Then that double came just because of how good a passer Timme is. Kalkbrenner isn't the same type of passer, maybe not as high level as Timme, but he's certainly going to be able to find open shooters if you send a double too early. So watching that cat and mouse game is going to be really interesting because you don't want to, give him easy one-on-one opportunities against the likes of Christian Bishop, even Dylan, who's shown, more of his Vanderbilt form to start this year, but it's still not our best matchup down low. So I think it's going to be key, specifically down low when it comes to Kalkbrenner, forcing that catch in the more of 8 to 10 foot range and not 4 to 6 feet from the basket, because he catches it that low, you're going to get crushed. So I'd say when it comes to that, just really try to push him out, make it as hard as you can, disrupt that offensive flow.
Whew. Yeah, I mean, you're gonna test Beard's ability to game plan for different types of big men, because I mean, I did my bold predictions today for Texas Creighton, and I mentioned this in the football post game for Texas Baylor the other day, but I try to put a lot of research into my bold predictions and to make them actually worth the read. But I'm going to give myself a shout here. I did say that Dylan Dessou was going to have a season high 3 blocks or more in the UTRGV game, and he had 3 blocks within the first 16 minutes. So give it a read.
It's always nice when those come true. You're watching it happen.
Right. But they come with a certain level of educated guess to them, and so I did say that Kalkbrenner was going to have a season high 8 free throws, and I think that's bold because to one degree, I do think that Texas is going to try to adjust enough to limit his effectiveness. But to the other degree, Texas is undermatched physically, and usually one thing of limiting a big man's effectiveness to that extent is trying to get him to the free throw line and trying to minimize your opposing team's points per possession, and that's one of the ways to do it. So breaking it down that way doesn't sound so bold, but Yeah, I don't know, and that's one thing we can dig into matchup wise is that I don't know how necessarily you limit the free throw line. I don't mean to bring up past trauma, but yeah, I mean the amount of times that Zach Edey or just a lot of the bigger Purdue players got to the free throw line against Texas in the round of 32. I don't really know what you do there because I was banging this drum to the high heavens during the offseason that I wanted a bigger defender on the inside, and this is the type of game where you could use that. So I don't know. I don't know what you do necessarily on the inside. Maybe you try to test the help defense of Dylan Mitchell with pairing Dessou up, seeing what he can do one-on-one. So I guess this is a good transition to the matchups.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it is that's the one spot on the court where, Creighton probably has the decided edge, both, like just production and experience. Kalkbrenner is by far the best big man in this game. And that doesn't mean I don't think Dessou can have a strong performance. I mean, we saw what Texas did to Timmy, limited him. But that was more Chris Beard and stylistically how they matched up, how they double teamed, when they sent that. So, like you mentioned, it is going to be on Beard to kind of create that game plan. Unfortunately for Texas, I do think that the guards and even wing players for Creighton are way more adept at creating their own shot than Gonzaga. Therefore, you're not going to be able to help off as much. Not only can they knock down that they're shooting as a team, they're shooting over 38% from deep, which Lord help us if that ever happened to a Texas team, because that would, I mean, I can't remember the last time that happened, but yeah, if you want to go into the guard matchup, it's going to be Ryan Nembhard, who is a true point guard, maybe you'd even consider him a pass first point guard. He's brother of Andrew Nembhard, former Gonzaga guard. And he's just so crafty, the way he can get in the lane, set up opposing players. He seems like he can get to anywhere he wants on the court at will. And he does that, standing at 6 feet, $165 when wet. So he just has this uncanny ability to navigate the lane, get you off balance, have a big guy kind of come out, throw a little lob up to Kalkbrenner. So Tyrese Hunter versus Ryan Nembhard is going to be a really fun matchup. And college basketball, people always talk about the point guard matchups. I think this is one of the better ones you can, really conceive. But I think the matchup that's going to dictate the game, maybe have I think the Nembhard Hunter matchup, they could cancel each other out. I think Marcus Carr on the defensive end is going to really have to step up. Hopefully he feeds off that energy that Hunter brings, and Carr takes a mindset of, okay, like Hunter's locking up. I got to do my part too, because Creighton's two guard, Trey Alexander, can do pretty much the same things as Nembhard, except he's a little bit taller and he can create his own shot, like with the best of them. The way he was able to get in the paint in Maui and then kind of fade away, use pump fakes to knock down 12-footers is really impressive to see. I think the tough thing about this Creighton team is they're so good at getting the ball into the lane off the dribble, and then your defense is scrambling. Texas has to find a way to, push them to the corners and then maybe send extra guys to trap, because you don't just want this team free-flowing, moving you side to side, because that's when you're going to get tired, and that's when they're going to get wide open looks, whether it's a dump down to Kalkbrenner or a wide open three. But yeah, the guard matchup between Trey Alexander and Ryan Nembhard and Marcus Carr and Tyrese Hunter, really not a better one you can ask for in college basketball, and it's going to go a long way in dictating this game. I would ask you, I know you've done some deep diving in on this game. Do you feel comfortable with, we saw what Hunter did against Gonzaga and Carr too these past couple games. Do you feel comfortable with our matchup in the backcourt, or is that something that, offers some pause?
It gives me pause. I will say this: the weakest defender in Gonzaga's starting five is Nembhard. I'm going to say this too. I'm a personal Pacers fan. So you mentioned Andrew Nemhard, game-winning three-pointer.
Yep.
Was the beater the other night against the Lakers. So sorry if anyone's a Lakers fan, but Andrew Nemhard. I was a fan coming out of college, bigger fan now. So matchup-wise, the important thing here, matchup-wise, it always gives me pause for these sorts of games where you feel like you have this set game plan where it's like, yeah, you feel like you know exactly what Creighton's going to do because you do. Creighton is going to do the same thing in 90% of games. I feel like this is the sort of game where they kind of change it up a little bit. They're playing on the road. They're coming off the Maui Invitational. They've got an 8-day break, roughly.
Yeah.
So, and they saw a player that has fresh film with a good portion of this Texas team. Like, it gives them time to prepare. The one thing I don't want to see this almost should have been this should have been a bold prediction for me. I have this weird inkling in the back of my mind that on a lot of possessions, that Creighton is going to try to match up Alexander with Hunter and Nemhart with Carr.
Okay.
And that would present issues because Hunter is not good against lengthier defenders that defend the perimeter well, and Alexander can do that.
Yeah.
And Carr does not do well against scrappy, undersized defenders that tend to make mistakes because what does Carr get lured into is mistakes. And it's weird how he gets, like, when defenders aren't great, that magnifies his own mistakes. But we saw that last season. I had mentioned that. I remember I mentioned that in a piece, and I did not do a good job of, like, illustrating examples. That is my own bad on that. I will try to include more like videos and stuff in those pieces moving forward for sure. But where it's like you see Marcus Carr, like he starts to get in this rhythm and then he starts to get tunnel vision to whatever rhythm he's in. Whether it be moving the ball around the perimeter, he starts to get in this rhythm where it's just like almost automatic. And it's good when he's on, but when he's not, it's not good.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know. It's this rabbit hole that I feel like even if they go Nemhard versus, like, because God knows if Alexander is drawing any sort of turnovers and Nemhard has a net positive game on defense. That's what I'm saying is, like, this, it scares me because, like, the defensive matchup isn't even that tough, but, like, there's, like, any sort of adjustments they can make, and McDermott is definitely a good enough head coach to make those.
Yeah.
But to a little bit more of the schematics, like, yes, there are ways that Texas can win this because Creighton plays very committed, I think is a good way to put it, very committed one-on-one defense. They follow through everything, it seems. They really don't switch much at all. And that's what I'm saying. If you have a defensive switch on the perimeter, you will notice because they will be following for a lot of the game. Correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it feels like they don't switch much.
Yeah, no, I think you're completely right, and I think kind of a big thing for Texas would be to try to bring Kalkbrenner away from the rim because we saw. I mean, last year I mentioned he won Big East Defensive Player of the Year. That's not because he's fleet of foot, and he's not. We've seen, bigs who are adept at guarding, perimeter players. But, Kalkbrenner, when he gets brought out outside, he just quickly checks the guard immediately back into his comfortability down low. He's an elite rim protector and can swat shots with the best of them. But I think drawing him out is what you want to do. And a way to do that is if Dylan Disu can hit an early 3 or 2. Kalkbrenner has to, start to respect that. Not only do you create an opening in the lane, but you're bringing a guy who doesn't want to be on the perimeter out to the perimeter. So I think that is like certainly an X factor, because if Disu comes out, misses the first couple shots, and then turtles and like isn't even looking at the rim going forward, Kalkbrenner's just going to sit back, and he's going to sit back against Christian Bishop. So I think it's important that happens. But no, you're completely right. I think it's interesting because when you look at Creighton on paper and when you watch them, and you even just look at their like box score numbers, it's like, wow, this team's really good on the offensive end, but I don't think their defense gets as much credit as it deserves. I mean, they're top 50 in Torvik and Ken Palm in defensive efficiency. And stretches of that Arizona game, granted Arizona scored 81, but Arizona plays with the highest tempo in the country so far this season. They're averaging almost 100 points per game. So holding Arizona to 81 is actually, somewhat of an accomplishment in and of itself. And there were parts in that game, especially like early second half, where it looked like the Wildcats were going to pull away. And Creighton just kind of really bowed up. And like you said, a lot of one-on-one defense where they kind of have this mentality where it's like, okay, F you, like you're not going to beat me. I think especially, specifically the 5 starters have like a ton of confidence on both ends of the floor. And are like, okay, like let's duke it out, because if you get into a battle where it's just, us against you, just, fists up, they feel confident they can win that. That's where like scheme becomes so important in this matchup.
I gotta take myself off mute to talk. I think that Creighton has so much. Well, okay, first of all, Creighton has so much to be worried about in the starting 5, but you're 100% right in the way that you can start scrambling up Creighton if you can first draw their bigs to the outside, and then, from then on out, I mentioned this in my bold predictions piece, and to be honest, there's any number of ways you can go. Is that, if you start getting Creighton out of whack on defense early on in the starting 5, you've already beat them. And that's where I wanted to mention, because you were talking about the advanced metrics for the defense, and I will give their starting 5 props till day's end. It is a very good starting 5. Their their bench isn't great, to say the least.
Yeah.
Their bench is a top 200 caliber bench. That's top 150. It's probably somewhere in that range, if I'm being real with it. If Texas can get a good start, let's say through the first 10 minutes of the game, you have a 3-point lead, but at the same time, you're setting the pace of the game. Like, you have your game plan working. You have, to some degree, Creighton on their heels. You're moving the ball really well. You're setting play, like your half-court offense is setting different plays well. Some screen and rolls, pick and rolls, some ball screens, things that are going to get you in some open looks. You can then parlay your defense, or not your defense, your bench there to just take over the game. And that's where I think that Texas could really magnify their advantages. And this is the second thing I wanted to mention, is the athletic mismatch. And that's, you can get into that for days, but in most positions, Texas does have the athletic edge. The problem is, at certain positions, do they have the edge in length? And that's where you get into an interesting conversation. But on paper, Texas does match up with Creighton very, very well. And where, I addressed the thing where you had said defensive efficiency earlier. And I think if the college game had more depth on the bench, I don't think Creighton would be in the top 75 in defensive efficiency, in the top 100 maybe. They don't play a game that's conducive to the modern game. They try to they try to elicit bad shots and then fundamentally box you out of rebounds. That's their thing. It's old school basketball.
Yeah, I mean, they rank 19th nationally in opponent offensive rebounds. They're only allowing 7 per game. So, yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, that's a pretty big X factor for me too. Is if there's any way to get these guys, the starting 5 that is, in foul trouble, major advantage to Texas. We've seen Texas. Texas legitimately goes 9 deep, and I would be comfortable playing Anamekwe for 5 minutes here and there, just throwing him out as a defender who is going to be aggressive and play fast. But my bigger point is Texas has more wiggle room when it comes to fouls and stuff like that, where Creighton, if 2 of their starters, get 2 early fouls, it starts to get a little dicey for them. You mentioned they have this kind of very strict way that Greg McDermott plays, like on both ends of the floor. And when you throw that into one way to throw that into whack is separating that vaunted starting 5. There's an account on Twitter, CBB Analytics, that does a really good job at using more of those in-depth numbers. And obviously, there's been a larger sample size now, and I don't have those numbers. But through 4 games, the starting 5 lineup of Creighton was the 4th highest net rated 5-man rotation in college basketball. And it was pretty insane because the teams that were higher than them, or the 5-man rotations that were higher than them in net rating, all had way less minutes played because, for Creighton, those 5 starters are going to play a lot together. So, yeah, I think getting some guys into foul trouble, it doesn't even have to just be Kalkbrenner. Like when you think foul trouble, you think go after the big guy. I think if Hunter, if Carr, if even Allen to an extent, who has shown in the past he has a proclivity to draw fouls, can get some of the Blue Jays in foul trouble, that lends a major hand to Texas. Because if you look at this bench, Francisco Farabello, a guy from TCU, so Texas fans might remember, and then Mason Miller, who's a redshirt freshman, Mike Miller's son, both really good 3-point shooters. But other than that, they don't really give Creighton anything. And so those guys are pretty easy to key in on the defensive end. They do one thing well. There's no one really that scares you on this bench. So easier said than done, but just playing aggressive is going to be huge. And I think could, end up turning the tide should someone on Creighton pick up an early couple fouls.
Yeah, I'll use this as a transition point to get to our predictions before the video runs too long. Because if we just start talking hoops matchups, it can go 4 hours.
Yeah.
But it's it's so interesting to me to think about like the way that Beard is able to use the bench this season. Because I'll be honest, coming into the season, I thought one of the weaknesses was going to be the bench, but the way that Marcus Carr has adjusted to his role and that Dylan Dusu has come on early has completely adjusted the calculus of the way I'm looking at the bench. It's at this point, it's like, well, can Timmy Allen fill a 6th man role, and can Christian Bishop continually be an X factor in the front court unit? Like, that's kind of what I'm thinking, but you look like you're disagreeing on that.
No, I'm not disagreeing. Sorry, I got lost in. I'm looking at these Creighton numbers from Maui, and every game in Maui. So I don't want to go back on this point, but just a final point on their starting 5. Every game in Maui, all 5 of their starting 5 played at least 30 minutes. In that crazy game against Arkansas, Shireman played 39, Kalkbrenner played 38, Nembhard played 36. And this is a game that didn't go to overtime. So I think what we really have to expect is that McDermott wants to play like all those guys are going to get a 4-minute blow in the first half and maybe a 2-minute blow in the second half, but they're going. He wants to play those 5. So I think it just even ramps up the point even more. And I hate to be that guy that just like that goes after fouls, or a team that goes, but like against a team like Creighton where their bench has not proven anything and everything runs through that starting 5, it's going to be important, I think the team is going to emphasize this. Like, okay, Kalkbrenner has one foul and it's 3 minutes into the game. Let's try to get that second in the next 5, something like that. Because those guys, if out of foul trouble, are going to be on the court for a majority of the 40 minutes. So yeah, sorry, I was just like locked in. I was going through game by game and I was like, okay, against Arizona, they all did. Against Arkansas, I was like, wow. But yeah, so I think it's really interesting to know. And that's what makes Creighton so scary. I mean, those 5 players are such a cohesive unit, one of the best 5 in the country, and they play so many of the team's minutes that it just adds up to the perfect storm of them being ranked as high as they've ever been in program history.
Well, they wouldn't have beaten Arkansas and Texas Tech if they had played their bench a significant number of minutes. Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned the Texas probably has a slight advantage when it comes to, like athleticism, length, maybe. Their bench, if you take into account their bench, that advantage is through the roof, because the guys on their bench, like we mentioned, Farabello, Miller, they're like specialists. They're not guys that are going to like come in and wow you with athleticism. They're like guys who are going to roam the perimeter and, play 3-point line to 3-point line. So.
Yeah. And that's why, you mentioned that, like, that's why I say that, like, that is specifically why I mentioned that Texas needs to be ahead. And I do wish I had done a 3 keys to victory on this today. Like, I know that wouldn't have been like a big like draw to the site, but it would have been really informative. Like, I do think that if Texas early on can have any sort of lead at a midway in the first half timeout point, that is enough to start saying, okay, Creighton might have to make some adjustments. Then you have them off schedule. And then at that point, you can start digging into the bench. You can start working with different things on offense. You're cooking with fire at that point.
Yeah, I mean, Texas has much more room for error when it comes to like a game plan disruption. If you get Creighton off balance, like that's major advantage. If Creighton somehow, gets Texas off balance, I think there's ways that Texas can work themselves back in the game. So I completely agree with you. Getting that early lead, holding on to it is pretty big. Yeah, I mean that's certainly a key to victory.
To the same note, though, like, I think it is interesting because, like, this Texas team hasn't played from behind at all this season. So what do they do if they're down? Like, yes, on paper, I mean, yeah, Texas is down 10 at half. Like, yeah, screw it. Tyrese Hunter's having an off game. You can throw Terrio in the 1. Like, Marcus Carr can play at the 1 if he's on. But, like, that throws that, like, I don't feel comfortable heading to the second half with that. That's not a recipe for success. So it's a test for both teams in ways that both teams haven't been tested before. So the early notes, like some of the early takeaways in this game, I think will be very telling of where the game goes. But the last thing I will say, and this is why I said I wish I had done 3 keys to victory, where like you had mentioned something that was interesting, where it's like you need to get, I mean, not only do you need to get Gonzaga on their toes here or on their heels here, but oh my God, Creighton.
Yeah.
Not only do you need to get them on their heels here, but you need to get some of their bigs in an uncomfortable situation, whether that be running a lot in transition, picking up the pace. They do run a faster pace, but it's not the way you would envision. They'll throw a lot of lobs. They do it in a very structured manner. It's not this super high flying 8 years ago Florida Gulf Coast type stuff. It's okay. Kalkbrenner's getting in his position. Throw him the ball. Dunk it down when he's getting 2 inches above the rim. It's Shireman handing the ball to Alexander. A very quick, structured dribble handoff. It's that sort of stuff. And so I don't think it's going to be anything you're surprised by. If it is, if we're surprised by Creighton, stab me.
Yeah, definitely. And that's it. Yeah, I mean, it makes it like not tougher, but you know what you're gonna get, and it's like, can you beat it? You know?
Yeah, for sure. This is a team that you should know what you're going to get and what you should adjust to, but to the same degree, it's a team that can throw you off base. I mean, there's like they're not in the top 10 if not for the quality of this starting five,
Yeah.
and so it's a team that has built up some quality starters over time.
Yeah.
But
No.
yeah, no. My favorite stat from their bench is that their highest usage player off the bench has a, I saw this earlier today, has his usage rate is 29.3% with a 0% assist rate and a 16.2 turnover percentage.
That sounds about right. Which it's crazy, but you look at
he plays about 12 minutes a game. Frederick King.
Okay, yeah. I mean, Frederick King is going. Yeah, he's going to play a little bit just because he's really their only other big guy that they're going to throw out there. But that's a dude who I expect our big guys to take advantage of. You know, I mean, I at least hope so. He's like he's a big body, but he's
like a DeAndre Ayton with no post moves.
Yeah,
from what I saw.
He's not the most fundamentally sound player I've ever seen, and so I expect when King the limited minutes King does play, hopefully Texas takes advantage of that.
Yeah.
But I would say the last thing I'm doing this real quick. The last thing before jump into predictions. This makes sense. For whatever reason, when I'm looking at splits on Basketball Reference, they just give me whole numbers instead of averages. So I had to do a little calculator work. But so Baylor Shireman, if y'all aren't familiar, the viewers, he was at South Dakota State for 3 years. I became aware of him like conference tournament time last year, and then actually tried to. I picked South Dakota State to kind of advance a little bit in my bracket just because he's, such a fun player. Unfortunately, they lost a close one to Providence in the first round. But I digress to say that he is like a guy who seems like he totally embraces the role of playing on the road and just like loves the crowd booing him and shouting at him and just feeds off of that. And not to my surprise, his splits through 3.5 college seasons. So through 97 games, he's averaging 13 points on the road and 10.8 at home. So, over a 2-point difference, which in college when the numbers are lower, it's like a decent difference. So just my overall point here is expect Shireman to, pull up from the logo a couple times and don't be surprised if those shots go in because that's kind of who he is. And he's a guy who can really get this Creighton team motivated and creating their own energy. I think if he doesn't have a good game, the Blue Jays are going to be hard pressed to win this one. But I certainly do expect him to play well. It'll be interesting to see what Texas does with those matchups. But he's a big game player, especially on the road. He's not going to be I don't think anyone on this Creighton team is going to be afraid of the Moody Center, honestly. Which is no slight at the Moody Center. It's more just a compliment to Creighton.
Yeah, well, and I was going to say to Shireman, I remember thinking about that because I do remember I do a lot of transfer portal stuff during the off season, so I pay very close attention. Obviously, when Shireman entered, I was like, well, we lost some wing shooters. Maybe he could be of value, but
yeah.
Any guy that's like, hey, you know what? I want some warmer winters. Let's go from South Dakota to Nebraska. It's like I don't care about stuff that is fun.
Yeah.
It's got a chip on his shoulder.
Yeah. He's like it doesn't matter like where I'm at because I'm going to be in the gym the whole time.
Exactly. So that's kind of been like. I mean, on a more serious note, I do think that like it's so weird. of like to think about what portions of this Creighton team will like stand out in the not maybe but just like make the NBA.
Yeah.
It's like Alexander could. I actually see a little bit more of like okay, this is a lazy comparison, but Duncan Robinson out of Baylor Shireman.
Yeah, I think he's way more adept at like actually creating his own offense.
He is. Duncan Robinson is just a catch and shoot, but
I don't know how that translates to the NBA because he can do it at the college level, and he proved he could do it at the mid-major level, and he's proven he can do it at the power level. I don't know if he can do it at the NBA level, but
people do discount though it was still quick shots, but Duncan Robinson did a lot of it. Like he had a little bit more room when he was working with it, but he was a little bit more off the dribble. He was a lot more off the dribble in college than in the NBA because the Heat just set him up open, and one game he'll go 8 of 16, the other game he'll go 0 of 8. But it's yeah. So this is a good transition point. I think we've gotten our points across here that like this is a tough matchup, and if you this is the last thing I wanted to say before getting into predictions is that like I hope that if Texas wins this game that you learn something about how you adjusted, about how you matched up, and how you made it through this game, because it's something you can learn heading into March. It's super cliche, but like you learn something. But yeah, or not cliche, but like way too simple.
But it's true. It's definitely true. And I think Texas fans, when we did the Gonzaga preview, we were like a little bullish. We both ended up picking Gonzaga just because I think of how many scars this Texas basketball. But it is, and I think we should go into the Creighton with the same mindset. It's not like football where like 1 or 2 losses kills you. You really, like you said, it might be too simple or cliche, but playing this game goes a long way, even if you lose, because you're going to learn a lot about yourself.
Yeah, and we'll head into predictions here. I'll get mine across first because I found the transition point here where you're saying I have the score that's stuck in my head. I have not given my prediction yet, so I don't have that below. I will do my bold predictions because I've talked about that way too much. But it's something that's stuck in my head, and I think I'm going to stick with it because I'm going to get the bold prediction up tomorrow morning. I'm going to go 77-75 Texas. I swear to God, I hope that's not the prediction that I gave up opposite to Gonzaga, Texas, but it might be. Anyway, if it is, I said something in the bold predictions that Tyrese Hunter is going to hit a game-winning buzzer beater 3.
I like it.
I want that. I said he was going to hit a season, or not a season high. That would not be a season high, but I said he was going to hit 4 threes. So that's the 4th. That's my prediction.
Okay. I'm going Texas 81, Creighton 78, which is nearly identical to the Arizona Creighton score. I think it's important to note that Texas pretty cupcake schedule besides Gonzaga, but they're still only allowing under 53 points per game, which is good for 6th nationally. Like, this team can really defend the crap out of you. Unfortunately, I think Creighton's going to hit too many shots for Texas and Chris Beard to really play this game in maybe like the 60s or low 70s to where they want it to. And because Creighton's probably going to hit shots, that means Texas is going to need to score as well. The one way I see this going very sour is if Texas just isn't firing from 3. I mean, right now, Creighton shoots 8% better as a team from deep through the 2022 season sample size. And there is a world where Creighton gets hot and Texas is cold, and it doesn't look very good. But I think Texas will be able to figure it out on the offensive end. I like Hunter. I think Hunter's a big game player. I know I gave Creighton credit. I think they're going to play well in front of this away crowd. But, I mean, playing in the Moody, whether it doesn't matter if you're playing a team who can handle it or not, playing at home in the Moody Center, which has proven through one game to be a very formidable place to play, definitely gives Texas a slight advantage and should be taken into account. So I think Texas back and forth game throughout, pull it out in the end. What is that, 81-78?
Okay. Feels weird that we've all been on the same page recently.
Yeah.
Tark's been giving realistic scores, and even you were a little bit more. I was always the realistic one of the bunch that was always tighter scores. So it takes something away from it. But no, I do think there's something to. There's a high floor on Creighton. So
definitely,
but
100%.
And I'll say this before I go, because I think I'll start including that as the season moves along. I do a lot of my own stats that I run. One of the things that I done last year was kind of do it was a quick Excel tool where you basically can split the 4 quadrants of teams, and then break apart those splits by quadrant matchup. So this was one of the concerning things to me, is that it is a trend year over year with Chris Beard, where the difference between the generic grouping of teams when Texas or Texas Tech has faced their entire opposition averaged together, it looks great. When they match up against a quad 1 team, it's not so great. There's a huge difference.
Yeah.
Where a team like Creighton might not be fantastic defensively as a whole, they have a really tough out of conference schedule. Mm-hmm. Their pace changes a lot more too. And so there are differences here. There are more factors that play into that. So when Texas plays this sort of team, the defensive efficiency does tend to drop.
Yeah.
And so I will try to readjust because there are adjustments you have to make year over year, but I will try to readjust and re-release some of those numbers. And just, if I can just send you the Excel tool if you mess around with some of the numbers on Excel at all.
Yeah. Yeah, so, it is, because at some point you have to factor that in, because numbers can be inflated by games like we've seen Texas play early this season. Luckily, they did the same things against Gonzaga, so but that would be playing devil's advocate. It's like, but
God knows if they can just be consistent and beat teams by double digits.
Yeah, man.
Wow.
If you let's win every game by double digits, and cut down the nets in a few months. That would be awesome.
Won't be that. Duke and UNC fans don't know that greatness. It's in Kansas. It doesn't. It's not that way. But all right. I think that's good. Oh, Lord knows. Wow. I completely forgot about our A.J. Johnson scouting. We do need to do Ron Holland and A.J. Johnson scouting, because I haven't found that much out there on them. Hoops recruiting is always way under scouted. Because people will follow that until Lord knows the day they're drafted. So
we should definitely come back with a more full breakdown for sure.
Yeah.
Hopefully Texas can add another name. I know you've written a piece or two on it, but that would be exciting.
Yeah, because they've offered 4 guys in the last 2 months.
Yeah.
Which is not, God knows, if you knew the Shaka Smart Air, I know people don't follow hoops recruiting super close if you're on the 40. But, dude, an October offer for that same cycle, it didn't happen. It didn't happen unless it was a 5-star kid you knew they were going to land. And the offer just happened to go out late. it's just the way it was. And so anyway, someone could prove me wrong there, but at least in the time that I covered, that was super rare to see this many offers go out this late. So one of the offers that went out, and we can talk about this more during, because this is a whole other rabbit hole. One of the offers that did go out was to A.J. Johnson's new teammate at Southern California Academy, 5-star center Isaiah Miranda. Texas is not the favorite there. They are not. I believe Louisville is. But God knows, does Louisville look terrible right now?
Yeah, to say
They
the
look
least.
like a high school team. So.
Yeah.
Yep. If you want to watch a horrible team, Cardinals.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, you're right. You're right about it. If you are a real sicko and you love watching, or if you're a Kentucky fan, I have the team for you. They play in Louisville, Kentucky.
Yep. All right. Well, this is a good transition point to the end because it's starting to go off the rails a little bit. But yes, we will come back with some hoops recruiting videos. At least I will be back tomorrow at some point. We got transfer portal stuff to cover for football. We will probably come back with some sort of post game for basketball. We will see the way the game goes. But yeah. Anyway, for Andrew Miller from headlines.com, we will be linking up some of the work below. But Shane Black, hook'emheadlines.com. Give you a hook 'em.
Hook 'em.